bringing you tonight to present on e-health. Just a couple of things before we get started, just to remind you that we do have an AGM coming up, and if any of you aren't flying up to Brisbane to put your vote in, it is probably very important that you look to see who you'd like to vote for, and we will send out an email letting you know who's actually going to be there, so you can submit your proxy form to those people, and that way your voice is heard and counted for the AGM. Is that the only news we've got so far?
I think so.
Fabulous. So without further ado.
Do you want to just do this?
Oh, forgot. I knew
it's very important.
We have the lucky door prize. Julia, do you want to pick that?
Oh, yes, I'd love to. Number 86, John Burns.
John Burns. John, would you like wine or chocolate?
Oh, there you go.
No, I'll take them both. I like
You get to pick the wine.
I love the wine.
The wine. See, John.
Very lucky.
There you are. Thanks, Julia.
No worries. Well, thank you very much, and it's lovely to be here tonight. I've been looking forward to coming down for a while, so it's excellent. What I'm going to talk about tonight is largely about e-mental health technologies and resources, and I am aware that we've got the November 1st deadline looming, where we're going to start looking at perhaps having some Medicare rebates for telehealth. So hopefully we'll have some time at the end of today to discuss that in a bit more depth. I've got a few points that I'd like to make, but primarily that's not the key of what I'm talking about tonight. Okay, so what I'd like to talk about really is what's some of the background about why we need to look at e-mental health in our practice, how we can select and use these resources. And then I've brought a bit of a case study, and I thought it might be helpful a bit later on to get online if we can, look at some of the resources and work out how we might use those in a case study. Okay, so really thinking about e-mental health, everything begins with the really huge reforms that are going on in the system around us. So over the last 10 to 15 years, it's become really clear from population health level data that mental health problems are much more common than we thought. And it's now predicted that Australians, all of us, half of us at least, will experience a high prevalence mental health disorder. So that's an anxiety, affective or substance use disorder at some time over the course of our life. Unless, of course, you're a psychologist, then you get a 60% chance of depression over your lifetime. So we're kind of special. But what this means, I think, is that all of us are either going to be carers or be caring for somebody who has experience of a mental health problem or experiencing a problem ourselves. So this has really changed, I think, a lot of government's thinking around mental health. It's also become really clear that there's very low levels of accessing help in mental health. In 2006, they measured it and they looked at people who had severe enough symptoms to qualify for a mental health disorder and how much help they had sought over the previous 12 months. And only 35% of them had sought any help. That's even just going to a GP. And then we all worked terribly hard with better access, and you guys managed to get it up to 46% by 2010, which around the world is seen as a huge achievement. But in terms of policymakers, it's still pretty disappointing because they can get an 80% treatment rate for similar, I guess, chronic physical conditions. So around the world, there's a great deal of interest in trying to develop new sorts of interventions that can cover a great deal more of the population. Given that we only got a 10% difference with all the money that's been spent on better health or better access, it's quite clear that we can't just keep expanding that exponentially. So people are looking for more low-intensity interventions and a greater range of them. So a lot of the e-health stuff has been developed to try and access people that don't ordinarily get help. And if any of you have ever spoken to Les Posen or Michael Carr-Gregg, you know there's all sorts of wonderful things around the corner. But these 5 genres or types of e-mental health resources are the ones that are really currently very easily available. A lot of people don't know that Australia is actually one of the top couple of countries in the world in terms of developing and researching and disseminating these things. So we have a really rich diversity of things to choose from. So I guess as well as mental health being seen increasingly as a public health problem, and therefore looking for e-mental health as perhaps a way of supplementing other sorts of interventions, e-mental health has also kind of fits in with, I guess, the move to more recovery-focused ways of thinking about mental health as well. So it can be highly accessible, and most of the resources we'll talk about tonight are provided at no cost to the consumer. And it can help people increase their literacy so they understand their situation and perhaps what can be done about it. And can also reduce stigma through reading about other people's experiences. Particularly, they can understand that they're not the only person, so it can reduce the isolation that often comes with mental health problems, and also improve self-efficacy. So there's pressure from a number of directions for this stuff to be taken up. So in 2012, the Australian government issued its e-mental health strategy, which is really about trying to take the really great resources that we've got and move them into and integrate them into the health system more broadly, and particularly in relation to primary care. So how does all this affect you guys? Well, I think it's important to explore this stuff to find out if it can help you achieve more in the limited sessions that you have. And as mental health experts, increasingly, both clients and referrers are looking and expecting that you'll be able to point them in the direction of good stuff. E is also being integrated into health systems, probably most notably the stepped care systems that are being rolled out through PHNs. So while you may not be doing a lot of low intensity therapies yourself, it's kind of part of the broader system, and you may end up supervising people using that kind of approach. So when you're thinking about e-mental health, I just would like to run through perhaps some of the things that you might want to consider. I think there's kind of 4 key areas. One is to think obviously about the client and how you're going to match them with the resource. Factors to do with yourself and the kind of therapy that you're doing. The features of the resource, and then thinking about how all 3 interact. Some people have suggested this is e-mental health is perhaps the biggest change to therapy since Freud, because it does potentially involve quite a change to our workflow, and the treatment team may compose of the client, the e-resource and the therapist in some cases. So for client factors, I guess there's a range of things that you want to consider in terms of their interest and resources, how much access they've got to the internet, their own capacity to protect their information. Power structures do shift quite a bit in e-mental health, and clients are responsible for more things around maintaining privacy and safety than they might otherwise be in face-to-face work. How well they're likely to persist and actually get through and use the thing that you're offering them, and also their learning style. So some programs can be pretty word heavy and use lots of jargon, and so you kind of want to really match that quite carefully. So in terms of the therapist aspects, I think it's important to have a general understanding of issues around using e-mental health, but also to be very familiar with any tool that you're wanting to give them. And to be careful about personal and professional boundaries. So one of the things I've noticed doing workshops over the last few years is that women, or not women, but people of a certain age like myself tend to often, I know that when I've come across apps, they've often been given to me by my children and used on a personal iPad or something like that. And that can easily then morph into clinical practice without necessarily thinking through and clearly seeing this as a professional decision that needs to be thought about carefully. So in terms of how all 3 interact, there's some important things to think about. I guess it's really just trying to understand the therapist, client and the e-thing roles in terms of how the therapist is going to monitor progress and respond, how they'll provide support, and really what the client should do. if they're feeling distressed or that their needs aren't being met. So I'd like to talk now a bit about really the features of the actual resource itself and how you assess that in a professional setting. So over the years, again, we've sort of developed this DICE model, which is a bit of a quick and dirty clinician's guide to assessing technology in practice. It's based on literature review and I guess broader experience. But we think that there's at least 4 domains that you do need to think about quite carefully and that really do tie back to a lot of our ethical responsibilities. So it's data security and privacy matters, information quality and how engaging and usable the thing is, how adequate and safe it is clinically, and also what kind of evidence there is for its effectiveness. So in terms of quality, we often think of that in terms of content, but in health information there's a whole body of scholarship around what's often called kind of information quality criteria. And these are basically ways of understanding how health information is produced and managed, and it's more about how it's produced rather than the content. But it can be quite important, particularly on the internet. So we know that psychoeducation is a good thing, we do a lot of it, and there can be some amazing stuff online that can free us from having to develop a lot of handouts for ourselves. But in order to find the good stuff, there is quite an important screening process to go through, I think. So first step is to really look at some of those information quality criteria. Sometimes you can find a good start by looking at some of the portals, and there are bodies that actually inspect and accredit websites. This one's the HON code, and it's called the Health on the Net Foundation. It's from Geneva, and it's basically a non-government organisation that's been going for a long time. And they inspect websites. You pay to have your website inspected. They do a full review of it, and then every year they inspect it again to see if you can still use their logo. So they have a large database of health information websites, including mental health, in a number of different languages. So that can sometimes be a good start. But there's also some things that you probably need to look at yourself as well. So first of all, it's important to understand whether or who's hosting or sponsoring the information. If it's a government-sponsored site, it will have a logo somewhere prominent, and it will use the suffix .gov. Sorry, that doesn't look very clear. That says .gov in the type on the web page. For not-for-profit organisations, they'll use .org, and for universities and other educational institutions, it will be .edu, or in some countries, .ac. It's important to understand who's funding the website, and again, if there's government funding involved, it's usually on a prominent page on the bottom of the first page of the site. If you go to the About pages, many sites will tell you whether or not they take advertising, and if so, if they do take it, how it might affect the decisions that they make. What you really want to avoid is sending people to sites where it's a bit hard to tell the difference between what's information and what's actually an advertisement. So it's also usually in the About section you can find a clear statement on a good, hopefully, on a good site, which tells you what the site is doing and what its intention is. You will also want to understand the qualifications of the people who have collated the information or produced it or written the program or whatever. And the Swinburne University's Mental Health Online site actually provides the names of people that were involved in developing all of the sections of their website. This one doesn't necessarily give names, but it gives you all the information you need to know to figure out whether they're credible or not. Some sites will actually cite peer-reviewed material, and so of course you will know whether that's appropriate or not. And the other thing just to be careful of is that you need to know how current the site is, and these little things down the bottom where it says page last modified is a standard inclusion in most software, but it just tells you when an IT person or when the site was last visited by someone who had admin rights. It doesn't actually tell you anything about the content. So what you want to find is something like this, where it says when it was last reviewed and updated. So that tells you about the content. And the other thing to be aware of is that even the best sites can be biased, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. So mental health sites usually lean towards promoting treatment because they want to encourage help seeking. But sites will often also reflect the agenda of the owners. So a psychologist website will probably look at psychological explanations of mental health issues, whereas a drug company site may focus on biogenetic explanations. And you also, of course, want to know whether what the site is offering fits on the devices your clients have. You'll get a sense just looking through the site about how engaging and accessible it is, but if you ever want to have a bit more of a formal look at the literacy level that's expected from the site, you can grab a bit of the text and put it in your Word document and use the spelling and grammar. It will tell you at what level, what grade level it's written at. And there's also some online tools that you can use for the same purpose. Okay, so for information sites, you just really want to know who owns and funds the site, what is their purpose, how do they generate and manage the content, and how engaging is it. The other thing that you want to look at, and this really just depends very much on your expertise, so you're the discipline experts here, is really looking at the clinical adequacy and safety of the material. So in safety, the main concern is really about the potential for contagion through exposure to potentially harmful material and interactions. So you want to be making sure that stuff that you're recommending to people doesn't link to any of this. And also, it's, I think, really helpful to encourage your client to let you know what sort of stuff they're looking at and how they're impacted by it. So contagion is often called by people online, they often term it as being triggered. So that's when they can perhaps get distressed or, I guess, be supported in potentially harmful behaviours by the experiences written by others. It can be positive, but there's particular concerns about online stuff in relation to suicide, self-injury and eating distress. So it's very common for people to come across this material, and most of the time it's not done intentionally. And I just want to give you an example of how easily this can happen. So if someone searches for depression information, usually on the first page of results from Google, you'll have Wikipedia. And if you go onto the depression page, it gives you a list of symptoms, including suicidality. And that's hyperlinked to another page just on suicide. And on that page, it gives you a whole list of methods, lets you know about their lethality. And many of those, you can then click on each single method and then go to another page that tells you quite a lot of detail about how to do it. So in 3 clicks, someone can go from just surfing around looking for some information on depression to actually finding something like this. In Australia, there's been quite a lot of encouragement for people like Beyond Blue to actually be advertising, so they sort of tend to come up quite high in the results, but usually you'll still get Wikipedia on the first page. So as well as, I guess, thinking about the other things that we've discussed, it's helpful, I think, to sometimes reflect on the material's stance in relation to recovery. So some material is definitely about trying to promote recovery, so that will be promoting help seeking and supporting coping and optimism and quality of life. A lot of sites are kind of neutral and they work on the internet value around free speech, and Wikipedia would put itself in that category. But there's also a range of sites that are often called pro-choice sites that normalise harmful behaviour and actually encourage it, and often position it as a lifestyle choice rather than a mental health issue. So I have just mocked up an example of what this kind of site might look like. And this model actually is from a standard iStock site, so that's kind of a bit weird. But This is what's called a pro-ana site, or a mock-up of one, where it's pro-anorexia. And these often have, I guess, a list of things that you should do. So feel guilty whenever you eat. Remind yourself you're disgusting and ugly. So it's almost the antithesis of what we might be trying to get people to do in managing these thoughts. There's often then a blog which talks about day-to-day experience. And Finspiration, which is usually like a whole range of images of very thin people the person may use to help keep themselves on track. These kind of sites, so this would be, I guess, visually similar to the kind of thing that often happens on Instagram or Tumblr. And often communities will develop around this. There will be blogs and there will be discussions back and forward. And there can also be like online forums. So some online forums can be set up for this kind of thing too, although they have less visual material. So if your client is looking at peer networks, or if you're thinking that it might be helpful for them to have online support through peer networks, you really need to be thinking about who's hosting the site and why are they doing it, what's their aim, is it recovery focused? It's really helpful if it's a community also to know whether it's got any rules to minimise contagion and support privacy. And also whether there's actual moderation, so whether there's people who enforce the rules. So in Australia, amongst all our other wonderful things, we've got some absolutely fantastic forums, and 3 particularly large ones are hosted by Beyond Blue, Reach Out for Young People, and Sane Australia. And Sane's got a fantastic model, because if you go onto a site, for example, for postnatal depression, they'll invite you to go into their forum, but it's actually the Sane forum. So they're kind of feeding all the people through from various non-government organisation sites. These sites you can check fairly easily. They will have community rules, and this one from Beyond Blue, you can see that it says no graphic details of self-harm or suicide, so it's got some really clear rules, and it has moderators who will either edit material or remove it if it doesn't comply with the rules. Okay, so what I would like to invite you to do now is just have a chat with your neighbour and just really explore what information and or peer support sites do you use with your clients, or do you think that your clients might use? I'm hoping that you'll all be able to get onto the internet and perhaps even explore a couple of sites. I'll give you some material that will help you find some. But maybe for 10 minutes or so, just have a think and have a chat about what kind of sites you think would be helpful or used by your clients.
Media release for telehealth from the government, but it didn't actually say. It just said it'll be offered to regions 4 to 7
Yep.
in the Monash thing,
Yep.
so it's smaller country areas, not regional sort of stuff, but it didn't actually go into any detail yet.
Yeah, so I think this was Louise, and I was like, I need to write all this down.
I'm trying to Google it.
Oh, good. Can I grab this one? Okay, I'm just trying to see, did I get...
The other thing is too, is that this year I think National Psych Week is going to be thriving in the digital age.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So that'll tie in for us too.
Okay, so I'm just going to give these out.
My questions are so basic, I'm embarrassed to ask them.
Oh, please don't be. Let me just get these out.
I kind of know what blogging is, but how do clients access, how do people access blogging? And what was the other thing? Instagram. What actually is Instagram? I hear about it. Or
It's a
even
bit-
Twitter.
Oh, no, it's, yeah.
Yeah, so I didn't get a computer at work till about 4 years. And I didn't get a smartphone until a year
Thank you. I might just give these out. I'll be right back, though. Yep. Can I just get you to pass those ones along?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So if you guys might want to look at some of those. Okay, yeah, sure. There you go. And one more for you. Yeah, that's okay. Just give you those ones. Oh, sorry. Good catch. There you go. It's got some things there for you.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you. One more? Okay, cool. Hello, it's lovely to see you. Let's give you that one. Take one for later. Gosh, thanks.
Just so you know, I'm managing the.
Oh, that's good. Oh, is that what you're doing?
Everyone's emails come in, and then
Oh,
we know
really?
when it goes down.
Oh, cool.
So that's what, and then I text Alistair, and then he comes back in and fixes it. So that's what we're doing. I'm paying attention.
That's okay. I'm sorry. I was just thinking, you probably do heaps of this because you've got young people all over the place in your clinic,
Yeah,
haven't you?
we use a fair bit of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have much trouble with them using inappropriate things, or?
Sometimes, yeah, definitely. We have a list of, so we've created lists of sites for parents as well, those
Awesome.
sites to go through.
Awesome.
But definitely, I mean, we administer all our questionnaires via electronically because it's just
So easy.
faster and
Yeah.
and our response rates are much better.
Are they? That's interesting.
Absolutely.
That's good.
I'm on the MBS online. It talks about telehealth and it hasn't been updated since 2014.
Well, you're doing well because I was looking at that stuff the other night, and most of it was 2012. So on the Department of Health, I think they've got a report. I think they did a lot of work maybe when the GPs or when the medicos got it.
Oh, they did? I'm trying to Google the item numbers.
I don't think they've released them yet.
Pardon?
I don't think they've released them.
It comes up under, one for specialty services, and that's 2012. And has all the doctors and stuff.
So what is this computer doing?
So that computer streams it.
Oh,
So we
okay.
send out links to all of our rural and remote members.
That's
can,
awesome.
Can stream in, and we get so there was.
That's why you're getting emails, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I get emails whether they can hear it, whether it's dropped out,
Wow.
whether it's. So it's quite the process.
So we should also offer them a heap of digital stuff because they haven't got handouts and stuff.
Oh, that would be amazing.
So
if
I'll
we
send
could
that through.
the link.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Okay, cool. Good. Wow, 60 people.
Yeah.
It's cool.
None of them have emailed me yet to tell me that it's down. I'm waiting.
Okay, I wonder if we can just bring that conversation to a close. And I'd just like to hear some feedback. What are some of the sites? Did you identify some sites that are useful or not useful? What are people using? I'm just wondering, can you give us some feedback about sites that you might be using in your practice?
We mentioned Mood Gym.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's been something that's been good a few years ago. We started using that.
Yeah.
Could you just repeat that?
Sorry. Yes, I was just curious to know whether.
Hear the response.
Oh, the response, yes. Mood Gym. So we're talking about Mood Gym, which is more an intervention program. We'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah. Are you? Yeah.
Not peer support, but like just other online platforms like Headspace.
Yep.
Which I just learned is actually not Headspace, it's an American company.
All right.
Yeah.
Do you mean the app or?
Yeah, the Headspace meditation app.
Yep.
I thought it was Headspace app.
Yeah.
I didn't realise that. Or British.
Yeah. British, I think.
Oh, it's British, is it?
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
I just a few months ago started using this way up programs.
Yep.
And I use this as an adjunct to therapy. I'm trying
Fantastic.
to do say depression or anxiety program whilst not doing kind of sessions with me to really try and reinforce the skills development
Awesome.
aspects.
What's that? What is it?
This way up. We'll talk about that again. That's another kind of intervention site. But yes, I'd be really interested.
The fact that as a clinician you prescribe the course to the client and so you kind of keep track of
And you get feedback, don't you, too? Yeah.
They do all lots of the questionnaires to
Yep.
assess how the treatment's going and you can look at those.
Fantastic. They've got some great information on that site too.
No,
Yeah.
I've looked at a few of them and that's the one I
Good. Excellent. So are people not using things like Beyond Blue or Black Dog or Reach Out just for information for people? Yeah. Pardon?
For information.
For information, yeah. Okay. And what about peer support? Not much happening with them? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for that. I would like to talk a little bit now about clinical adequacy. So we looked a bit at safety, and again, this is where you do have more expertise than anybody else, I think. So, I guess when we're looking more at sites or technologies that are to support interventions, that's usually online programs, and some apps also work in that area. So when you're going through that material and thinking about giving it to a client, I think it's really important to sort of check the scope and the comprehensiveness. I mean, you really know what an intervention for a particular issue should be and what it should contain. So it's important to make sure that it's got the right things in it, that it is consistent with best practice, and also it's the right intervention in the right dose, and that it's been translated well. Sometimes things, when IT people or other professionals get involved in translating psychological material into other formats, it can lose some of its meaning or just become perhaps a bit more superficial than we might like. So that's an important assessment for you to make. I'd like to sort of talk a little bit about online intervention programs. They, I think a few people here have talked about using them. These ones are really important, and again, these are ones where I think Australia is particularly on the cutting edge. So generally they do include some screening and feedback, so people get some sort of symptom questionnaire and then some feedback about that. There's usually psychoeducation as well as skills and therapeutic tasks. So it's basically often based around CBT, although they're becoming more diverse in their approach. And they often, the early ones particularly focus on anxiety and depression. But again, there's a much more broader spectrum coming out now. So there's two main types. One are designed not to be needing an in-house therapist. So people can either go through them themselves or they can go through them with support from people in the community, therapists in the community like yourselves who are not specialised in e-mental health. So I'd just like to let you know about a few of them, and then perhaps later on when we're doing the cases you might be able to look at some of the sites and understand a bit more about them. So eCouch is a program that's offered by ANU where I work. It has a number of different modules within it. It has grief and loss and divorce and relationship breakdown in addition to anxiety and depression type interventions. Mood Gym was one of the first ones to come up, and I think was first deployed in about 2001. It's been revised many times since then. So that has 5 modules, each take about half an hour to do. If you get in touch with them, they'll send you out a manual which gives you an idea of how you can support people doing the program, and it has a range of translations available. My compass, many of you will know about. It's from Black Dog, and it has a wide range of programs, including one for people wanting to manage their diabetes. So it's not just mental health programs. And it has some functions on mobile devices, so people can track a range of different things at once on their mobile, and that will then get uploaded back to the program. On Track is offered by QUT, and that has some really interesting programs. It has Get Real, which is for people with early, hallucinations. There's a carers program, depression and alcohol, as well as an alcohol program, and they also have a diabetes program. All these programs are free. Now, our colleague here was talking about This Way Up, and they have, again, a wide range of programs. They've got everything. I think they've got meditation and all sorts of mental health issues and chronic pain. They also have a clinician guide that tells you how to support people using that program. And they will give you emails, or they send out emails letting you know how your client's going, and particularly if there's any deterioration. This one does have a fee attached to it. Some of the programs are free, but some of them do cost $59, I think. The Brave program is from University of Queensland and is for young people. It's an anxiety program. And Curtin University in Perth provides OCD Not Me, which is for young people 12 to 18. And this is a really lovely program. It's kind of gamified. People have little knapsacks and they have to climb up mountains and get attacked by anxiety monsters and various things. It's really great. That one is, I think, 12 to 18 years. Yeah. Now, all of these ones, if you get onto their website, most of them you can just join if you want to. And this one, and I think Brave, and I know This Way Up, a number of them actually also have little videos and things for clinicians, so you can see a little bit of what's inside it. So the other main group of these programs is programs that are designed to be what might be called virtual clinics, where they will have like a central place where they deliver these programs from. And they will have therapists that they recruit and train and supervise. So they have in-house therapists. And hopefully, how many people here have heard of MindSpot? Hopefully everybody, being in Sydney? Yeah, okay, great. So you all know about MindSpot, and that's provides in-house coaching therapy, and people can join up or can contact them, have an assessment, they get feedback, and then either get a referral to